Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
My name is Lauren Richmond Jr., and today is the second half of our interview with the many. Before we jump into the remainder of our interview, I want to give you the individual bios for the members. So Darren Calhoun is an associate fellow with Christians for Social Action and the worship leader at Chicago's Urban Village Church, as well as for conferences like Q Christian Fellowship and the Reformation Project. He's also a sought-after speaker and worship leader, blogger, and activist, working to help communities and churches become more inclusive of a diversity of people and expressions as an authentic reflection of love and justice. You can find him at DarrenCalhoun.com. Michele is a classically trained musician steeped in music that has grown out of the Black American experience and has performed as a solo artist all over the world. She also has a strong theater background and has dedicated herself to creating performances that help bring about the healing and restoration of the world. Lenora Rand is an award-winning singer-songwriter. She's a recent graduate of the songwriting program at Belmont University in Nashville. She began writing songs about compassion, justice, inclusion, and a world where all belong when she was 13 and garnered national acclaim in 2013, winning a Grammy Foundation contest with her song Start Over. Along with writing for her solo career, she writes most of the music for the many. Her website is hannarandmusic.com. Lenora Rand writes the lyrics for the many and is co-director of the music arts liturgy resource group, the Plural Guild, crafting words and experiences to help people worship in ways that more deeply reflect a peaceful, just, and open expression of faith. Having spent over 25 years as creative director at one of the world's largest ad agencies, she now is also running Small Good, a strategy and creative consultancy for businesses and organizations trying to grow more good in the world. You can learn more at wearesmallgood.com. Finally, we're not going to talk to him, and you haven't heard his voice, but behind the scenes is Gary Rand, who co-directs the Plural Guild with Lenora and produces the music of the many. He's a veteran worship pastor, worship leader, and songwriter. He is the former worship director and adjunct professor of worship at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago. So if you missed the first half, I encourage you to go back and listen to the previous episode. And shameless plug here, do us a favor and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And now, without further ado, let's continue our conversation with Darren, Leslie, Hannah, and Lenora. I want to talk about the song that I was first introduced to y'all, that really, just listening to it again, I just can't even listen to it hardly without getting weak-kneed, Again and again, a song you wrote for Lent. And when you talk about kind of all these themes you've talked about, to me, this song again and again just encapsulates it so beautifully. And I want to go back to something, Hannah, you said about church so often being about glory to God, then leaving. So that's a lot there. So maybe talk about the song again and again.
Yeah. Again and again, I think, Lenora, it would be great to hear from you about the lyrics, but we actually wrote a song which we called Why Are Things So Broken, I think 2 years ago, maybe. And we knew that it was something special because it was so true. Like,
well, Hannah, I'll just jump in. Can I just jump in and say one of Hannah's gifts, I would say, as a songwriter is, I'm going to get a little choked up, but she's so good at that first line of the song. Like, and her tune on this, Why Are Things So Broken, it was just like, it went right to my heart. We were not totally happy with the lyrics 2 years ago, but so go ahead, Hannah. But I just want to say, we knew we had to do this song. We just didn't know how to do it,
Yeah, and I think often Lenora will write these lyrics and put them on the piano, and I saw these words, and it's just like, I think probably what you're feeling too, Lauren, is like, it just breaks your heart just seeing the words, and the melody just comes because you just are singing what you're feeling. And at that point, and still today, there's just so much that in our world that is just broken, and I look at it all and I'm like, how am I supposed to do anything about all of this? Because it's just too much. And also, I needed some way to say to other people, like, are you're seeing that this is broken too, right? Like, can we be together in this brokenness? And I think when we were able to finish those lyrics, and put it out recently, I think I agree with you. I think it's one of my favorite songs we've ever done. Yeah.
I think the turning point, I think one of the other pieces about The Many that's so great is that, we had sort of a first round of this song 2 years ago, and we had some very good discussion about it in the band. As I recall, Darren was like, yeah, but I don't really love what we're doing with the words on the chorus because of this issue. And I was like, oh, okay, I hear you. So, it's so great to be able to be in a group that can be honest with each other and can push each other. And I think that was why this ended up sort of being put aside for a while. And then...
and to be clear, it wasn't a oh, this doesn't rhyme issue.
Right.
It
right.
was it was more of, I think it was like, like using phrases that are ableist or something like that we just, like, as a, white woman, sometimes we don't know.
Yeah.
And it's nice to get different feedback.
Yeah. And as a person who, Darren is in a lot of circles where he advocates for people all the time, and I think he is just such, I don't know, I'm just going to say, you're just such a great person about bringing those kinds of issues to all of us and helping all of us, I think, really kind of push us a little bit. So that's what happened on this song. And at the time I was like, oh no, I don't know how to fix this. But it was great. I think it was really, really great that we were able to come back to it. So,
yeah, one of the things that I've been doing in my own just personal growth practice is trying to learn where are the ways that I show up. Yes, I'm a Black man who's gay, but I'm also able-bodied. I'm also cisgender. I'm, for the most part, I think neurotypical. That might change, but there are all kinds of ways that I can be showing up for others as well, and learning just the everyday language that we use that stigmatizes, the everyday language that we use to describe our experiences. They're better words we can reach for or make common even. And so, yeah, what I loved the part that we had this idea, and then we worked on it. We talked about it. We asked some other folks about it, and then we let it rest and we let it breathe and grow. And I've personally felt so impacted by this song coming up and us, doing the recording for it during the pandemic, because it speaks to me like, oh, we've seen so much come up. We've got, it's clearer than ever what anti-Blackness looks like in this country. It's clearer than ever what trans antagonism and transphobia looks like in this country. Like, it's overt. The voter suppression. There's so many things that are loud and clear. And even our band has fans and friends who are around the world saying, yeah, here too. Here in Australia too. Here in South Africa too. And so it's a reminder. It's just like, things are broken, but we have this moment where we see each other and we remind each other, it's like, but we're still here and we're going to do what we can to make things better. And like, that's the encouragement. It's not, oh, one day we'll just get away from here. It's just like, no, like, what does it mean for God's kingdom to be here on earth as it is in heaven right now? not just in the
it's definitely a song of lament, and it's definitely a song of, so many of the Psalms talk about how long, O Lord, and that refrain about again and again, like, it just feels like so much. This stuff just keeps happening. And I do think, for me, part of the song is also, again, as a white woman in this society, the second verse is also about confession, and it's also about looking at my own complicity in the things that are wrong in this world, and confessing that and saying, I have to confess this again and again every single day, and I have to keep working on this again and again. And then I think the piece that there is a little bit of hope at the end, I think, which is that sense of like, again and again, your love remains. God is with us in this, in all of the brokenness and all of our own brokenness and the brokenness in the world. God's love remains, and we hold on to that.
Leslie, how about any thoughts from you here?
I think that Hannah and Lenora did a great job. Yeah, I'm at peace with this question.
Torn at the seams, it's getting harder and harder to see what any of this means. When hate is having its day and children are shot in the street, sometimes there's no way. Death has lost its sting. Why are things so broken? Again and again we pray. Where has all the mercy gone? The writings on the wall, we just wish that we could sleep. We want to close our eyes. We're not who we want to be. We look in the mirror and we don't like the face that we find. We pray that you are listening. God, forgive us one more time. Why are things so broken? Again and again we pray. Where has all the mercy gone? We are looking for your face. We are broken, still your love remains.
I want to talk about here, and it's something I see kind of throughout your music. And Lenora, you kind of just spoke to it about confession, and you all do so much work incorporating liturgy. And I think about how in so many churches, music is just seen as about quote unquote worship. And as I see your music, it incorporates so much more, from lament to confession to justice seeking. And I'll just, for me, it's about grieving. I'll be transparent here, and I'll talk more about this in a future podcast. Literally, as we're recording this, I'm going to send out a message later today that my church is closing, and it's brutal for me. It's a church that I started, and I'm super grieving it. And I appreciate your music in that. It makes space for just more than like I'm a happy, joyful follower of Jesus. I'm able to feel what I'm feeling, whether that's grief or rage or lament or the need to confess. What else is there? I mean, I think there's so much in your stuff.
I would just say one thing about the word worship for me. I think we have limited the definition of worship so much to praise. Like, lament and confession are also a part of worship. And I think that we've just narrowed it down and just defined worship as, we come to praise and give glory to God. Well, for worship is when you show up, open to God and open to the people around you, and you show up honestly with your questions and your doubts, and you show up laying it all out there, but present. That's worship to me, and that's why lament and confession are a big part of what we do, because that's worship, it's just a part of worship we've walked away from so much in the church these days.
Yeah. And Lauren, I just want to take a moment to appreciate that moment that you're in, of, moving into another transition. One, you've invited us into holy space. You're in a vulnerable space. You're in an important time. And I appreciate that you felt comfortable to bring us into that. And that's, again, I choose that word holy space on purpose. The places where we're in that difficult moment, I think that's where we often experience God in profound ways. I don't want to say most, because sometimes we glorify suffering, but I'm reaching for this idea that when we don't do it often enough in church. You might do it in 12-step, you might do it in therapy, you might do it in an argument with your spouse, but we don't invite people into those broken, hurting spots that are fresh. We always, at least in many evangelical traditions, we tell people about after it happened, but not when it's going on. So thank you for letting us into that spot.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that is worship. Wherever Jesus was is really something that I think organically, and our trajectory as a band is being able to have that vulnerability that we're building into how we engage with one another, so that we can be gentle and thoughtful about how we engage with you, so that it can be passed on, and that the many is growing in the ability to see God past walls and specific genres and specific Christian traditions, and to really reimagine, reassess, re-engage what a experience with God can be. And so to Darren's point, the more vulnerable we are, like you just were, Lauren, the more we let go of thinking that God is only accessible when we can honor the triumphant victories or the overcomings, as opposed to there's colonized / manifest destiny that we attached unconsciously to how we engage God. I can attest to, specifically here in the West, that there's weakness in being weak, when really there's beauty and such depth, such mystery, can be painful mystery. And again, we miss the mark when we don't find the appreciation in pain. And let me tell you, I'm not saying that I'm not being sensitive to suffering. To be clear, that's not what I'm saying. But the ways in which we've been often taught how to engage suffering, it doesn't have to deplete us as much as it does. There's a lot of assistance that God offers us in the suffering places, like lament, the ability to release, the ability to be vulnerable, and create safe space in our communities. And the more we step to the plate with choosing these quiet, gentle spaces that are genuinely sacred, genuinely holy, genuinely safe, then that's really where nurturing exploration and our expansion of worship with God can really take flight.
Wow. So good. So good. I can't keep, I think about what you're saying and the songs running through my head, the kind of the popular worship songs right now. And you're not saying they're not ever appropriate. What you're saying, there needs to be a balance or space for, at least, we can have the Waymaker, Miracle Worker, Promise Keeper, but we need to have space for, like, this sucks right now, right? God, this sucks. And I think I think what so often happens in, I don't know if I'm being a bit stereotypical here, in evangelical Christianity, is that, there's a, I don't know what to call it, like a scapegoating suffering, in that, like your suffering is we kind of look at people's suffering as like, oh, that's part of God's plan. And, so we don't really honor the suffering in a way, honor the person who's suffering more. We kind of just valorize them for suffering when they don't really want to be suffering, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we sometimes blame sufferers too for their own suffering. Maybe, check out the sin in your life, it's that kind of, you're suffering because you're sinning, probably,
really haven't been.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I have found, this is an I statement, that because we're often inundated with God's victories, we haven't worked our muscles of empathy and sitting in the quiet. We get impatient, right? And it's like, okay, you're still depressed? Okay, wait a minute. Are you utilizing the principles of Jesus to overcome your depression? It's like, so there's a lack of walking, the ability to walk alongside one for the journey. And that, again, is an aspect of worship. The ability to have the wherewithal to not just be looking for the instant gratification. Jesus is not, a candy box. He's not. What are those? He's not a gumball machine.
Vending machine, God. Yeah.
Yes.
I'll take a gumball machine.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this all-encompassing image, philosophy, whatever y'all have of worship. And I think it really speaks to what I see is like this. There's this breaking down of the bifurcation between the sacred and the secular, and seeing like it's all God. And I don't mean to be super pantheistic here, but I think if I'm hearing y'all right, it's like God is active in all of this.
Yeah. Something you said, and I Googled real quick just to double check. It got me to thinking about the ways that we show up for music, and I'll explain that. So we mentioned the contrast between what we're doing, the songs that we're producing, and a song like Waymaker. And Waymaker's again just a real interesting example of how context matters so much. Waymaker was written by Sinach, who is a Nigerian woman and has her own, success in her own right. But in the U.S., it was popularized, if you will, by white evangelicals. And the context changed. I think so. Bethel, or maybe, everybody's re-recorded it by now. But what's so interesting is that what I often find is the ways that Western American, often white folks, connect with music is from this place of privilege, of access, of power. And so when we hear Waymaker, it's often about, okay, God's going to make another thing work for me, or another thing work for me. Whereas when I think about where the song is written, the context is from a country that was colonized. Nigeria was colonized for its resources by Britain. And so people who were colonized were surviving something, as opposed to needing something to work out, like a new car or a new house. And the context of being a waymaker in a survival, or the theology from below, is very different from the context of a waymaker from above. And so again, I'm thinking about the ways that it's not even necessarily the songs that we sing, but it's the context in which we present it, where in America we often get what some have called a prosperity gospel, or we get a gospel that is individualistic. Whereas the country this comes from is collectivist. It's the people that this come from are thinking about, like, and I don't want to put anything onto the original author, but I'm just thinking in the ways that the world has been colonized. It's like so many of our songs were actually about, hard stuff, but because people who didn't necessarily have the same hard stuff were hearing it, they took it in the way that they were had access to. So all that to say, I'm just thinking about how we have the opportunity to create new contexts. We have the opportunity to create, to set the frame differently. Another example of this is the song "Break Every Chain." I was in singing with the Reformation Project. We're singing in a room full of people who are LGBTQ plus and their allies and church leaders. And "Break Every Chain" was a typical song to be used to say you need to break the chains of homosexuality. Tasha Cobbs even wrote, even did a recording where that's a part of the recording. So why would a bunch of LGBTQ people sing this song? We're reclaiming it, right? We were taking the song back in some ways and saying, no, like, we're going to break the chains of oppression. We're going to break the chains of antagonism towards gender and sexual orientation minorities. We're going to take all this back. And so I'm just thinking about the opportunities that churches and people have to reset the frame. Our song "All Belong Here" does the same thing. So many churches make communion about blood and violence, when the communion dinner was a dinner party with close friends. We have this idea of like focusing on the violence of the cross at communion, when the communion meal was actually about us coming together, even the people who would eventually betray us. And so I'm like, what are the opportunities for us to really reset the frame and reimagine what our worship gatherings could be if we just told a different story?
Wow. Thank you, Darren. I love that you brought that up because, Lauren, you said something that stood out to me. And in many ways, Darren addressed that too. And that was when you said you don't want to be too pantheistic. And what's interesting is the ways in which we engage our point of view, like what Darren was talking about, and expanding that, exploring that. That can be, that's also in how we're approaching church, how we're approaching Jesus, how we're approaching our understanding of worship. Jesus was a good Jewish man, right? What elements of Judaism or the Torah are in our Christian expression of Jesus? So we've actually denounced, Jews in many ways. And so this idea that to embrace Jesus the Jew would be, and I'm not saying this to you, but it brought so many thoughts about how we have so many walls. And like our song says, we're tearing down walls. And so if Jesus was a Jew, then what in the Torah, God help me, don't stone me, listeners out there, I love you. What potentially in the Torah can be a blessing to us if that was Jesus's meat, bread, and drink? So this idea that by engaging in something that is foreign to our Western Christianity would be pantheism or anti-Jesus is often what's underneath the bedrock of how we're engaging with the world around us. We have to protect ourselves from the sin of the world, and really we're keeping our love from being expressed to the world. We're not allowing Jesus to express love to us in the world, if that makes sense, because Jesus is everywhere. We're alienating ourselves from Jesus by not going where Jesus was. And so I really appreciate you bringing that up, Darren, because when you start assessing context, then you're teaching yourself and your community the ability to see God in different ways that can really be a blessing. Really be a blessing. For example, in my meditations, I was listening to a guided meditation recently, and I was directed to simply stare at a flower. And that's not something I've ever done in church. But the tears came, and just it was just so beautiful. It was an act of worship. And so I really encourage at the listeners, the ways in which we've been designated to say this is worship, this is not worship. Pause. When you're driving in your car and you look over and you see someone smiling at you, that was a gift. So there's ways in which we may be missing that we're really actually in communion with God, and it's not inside the church walls. It's not necessarily on our knees only.
And I think it's not, the gatekeeper is not what you believe either necessarily. I think about the scripture, where Jesus says, "Come all you who are weary and burdened and heavy laden," and all those words. And I think about, it wasn't like, "Come all of you who sign on to this set of beliefs," and it was really, come as you are, where you are. And I feel like the invitation from Jesus was so open. And I feel like that kind of is the invitation that we want to give ourselves, and we want to give everybody else in our music and just in our lives, is like, as Leslie's saying, as Darren's saying, as we're all saying, is like, just trust that we can come as we are and that Jesus meets us there, wherever we are.
There was a fun fact. Just as Leslie was talking about, Jesus being a Jewish man, I've been trying to follow and listen to more people who are Jewish culturally or religiously and learn like what their perspectives are, because there's so much in their tradition that we just kind of blazed right over. And one of the things that came up today on TikTok, if you're not on TikTok, you don't even have to post videos, just watch the content. A Jewish woman on TikTok was talking about the prohibition against mixed fabrics, which many people just kind of throw out because it doesn't make sense, or we say, well, that's for the context and the time, but why was there even a prohibition? And the prohibition was because only priests were to wear mixed fabrics. And what she was saying is that there's a thing where the things in Deuteronomy were literal and a metaphor. And so a prohibition against mixed fabrics was saying, don't pretend to be a priest, which was a metaphor for don't pretend to be something you're not. It wasn't about the fabrics being bad, but because we don't engage with this tradition that Jesus was from, we miss this really important lesson about being authentic, about being who we are and not pretending to be something we're not. That was very clearly there, but we try to make the Bible a rule book instead of saying, what is this trying to guide us into? And seeing that there's a whole tradition that has very smart understandings of what was written because it was in their context, not our 2021 Christian Jesus-y context. And I'm just like, yeah, there's a lot to be found in that we can reclaim and create new rituals around. Like we have a thing that we do where we actually invite people to look in a mirror as we're singing about our bodies. And when's the last time you actually sat in church and thought about your physical body as opposed to like this disembodied spiritual thing that we typically do?
What I'm hearing so much of in even this last few seconds, but the last few minutes here we've been talking about is this theme, Darren, which you kind of spoke to, and I'm curious what others want to chime in here, share here, but you mentioned it, Darren, about how Western, especially white American Christianity, tends to like bring in practices from like Waymaker to what you just said about kind of, or Leslie, I think it was you who said about taking in kind of parts from Jewish faith, and just kind of ignoring or overlooking the rest. What do you think are some ways that church could do better about, shedding light, educating people? I'm not even sure how to say it or ask it. How could churches do better on that?
My first thought is we've many churches have isolated themselves honestly, that in itself has been a powerful and very poignant path that really has left a lot of our churches stagnant. And to be clear, when I say isolate, when I brought it up and Darren took it further, but let's just take a moment to sit with the fact that Jesus was a Jew, and most of us as Christians don't have any understanding or very little connection to Judaism. Let's just sit with that, right? We have dedicated our lives to this Jesus, and we know so little about his cultural truths, his idea of who God was. We have spoken for him in many ways, based on our context here in the West. That is profound. That is isolation. And so that's why I brought up this idea, gave you a little pushback on the pantheism. It's not pantheism to honor who Jesus was. He was a Jewish man. And so the ways in which we've cultivated this king, this victor, this mighty conqueror Jesus, what if, well, not just what if, there are so many beautiful facets to Jesus. And earlier I said that Jesus was not a gumball machine. To be clear, he is not only a gumball machine, because Jesus is gum and he's popping. But he also has other sides to him. And we need to just stop using him for popping, and we could, he could do some other things. So
I was also thinking, this is a little bit divergent from where we've been, but in response, Lauren, I was thinking about education in the church, and I think so many times we do education in a rational sort of way versus a more experiential way. And I think for many people, just bringing in songs from different cultures in a worship service and giving the context of that song, or if you sang Waymaker in your church and you talked about, okay, the person who wrote this song was experiencing this in this moment in cultural history, and then if you did that with a Bach cantata, and you did it with, you know what I mean? It's like everything comes out of a context. Everything comes out of a people's lives and their different experiences of God based on their culture and their circumstance. And I think to be more, telling those kind of stories as we go along, and prayers too, like we might pick a prayer from a classic kind of, religious book, and we might pull in a prayer from that is like a prayer from the Muslim tradition, and talk about how that prayer, there are all kinds of ways of, bringing in kind of different experiences of God and putting it in context that I think actually would be very helpful for people to understand that my thing that I'm most comfortable with worship-wise is because of who I am, because of the context that I was born and grown and all that kind of good stuff.
I think often too, like when you bring in music or liturgy from other cultures, sometimes it expands your own view of God. So you might have this one view of God, and then you hear a different song from a different culture or a different act of a different culture, and your view is wildly expanded, just because you've never even thought to see God that way.
And different rituals too. I mean, I think, and being aware of what the rituals might mean, and creating. One of the things we've tried to do is kind of create some new rituals for people to experience. Darren was, I think, mentioning this earlier about we do a liturgy. We have a song called "These Bodies," where we're actually singing about bodies in church, and we have a whole liturgy that we developed about, that this kind of experience of being bodies that have been damaged and hurt by our culture and by families and all this kind of stuff. And it's a part of that is we invite people to, as a part of it, you can write with sort of washable marker on your body at some point during the liturgy, names that you've been called and shames that have been placed on you and your body. And I got to tell you, boy, when I'm always shocked, but people do this, people do it. And I actually had somebody tell me once after an experience that they didn't know it was washable, and they did it anyway, and they're thinking, how's this going to look when I'm going home on the train with this on my hand, But then at another point, a little bit later, then we invite people up to have their hands washed, and there's this moment. It's like a communion moment where you come forward and you can either wash your hands yourself or someone is there to do it for you. And and bless you with words of love. And I got to tell you, I mean, it's a powerful experience. And that's not one of our traditional church liturgies or church rituals, but bringing in some images and rituals from other places and other ways of experiencing God has really been helpful in that.
And also, one last thought. If you are engaging in cultural exploration, bring the people in that it's their culture. If they speak the language, if it's their ritual, have that understanding that God is big enough. Jesus is there. And, there's so much to be gained from letting them come in and tell you who they are. For not to say that if you live in a rural area and you just don't have access, that but if you can, do the best that you can to open up your doors and tear down those walls.
And I have one more thought. One of the things that's so challenging for many of us is in our society, we've built a lot on certainty. We only want to engage things that we know the exact outcomes of, and we want to be certain of all of our theological beliefs and so forth. But the scriptures that we read are full of uncertainty. They're full of questions. They're full of doubt. We see the disciples not really knowing what's going on at some pretty critical moments. And in my practice of consulting with churches and helping them work through how do we deal with race, how do we deal with LGBTQ, how do we deal with immigration, the certainty and the fear of not being 100% correct is what hinders so much of this process. So the practical thing to deal with that certainty is, instead of trying to have all the answers, just get more confident about what it is you believe. So many times we just say, oh, well, we just believe the Bible. And it's like, no, that's a little vague, actually. If you're certain of, if you, instead of being afraid of getting things wrong, if you get clear on what you believe, and I would even say hold that with an open hand, because clearly there's room for God to challenge some stuff. But getting clear on what you believe gives you the space and the freedom and the confidence to be able to go into other spaces, to deal with other people, to hear opposing thoughts, and not feel like your whole construct of God and faith and your whole congregation is going to fall apart because someone said something that doesn't fit what you believe. That sounds fragile, right? We have this faith where Jesus said, I'll build this church and the gates of hell won't prevail against it. Why are we worried about a gym shoe with a pentagram on it if Jesus said the gates of hell won't prevail? What if we, instead of being worried about people doing things wrong, what if we said, no, there's a God who says I can put my trust in this God of the universe, and that as a result, I can be sent to go and witness and go and be light and go and engage in all kinds of places. Go ye therefore into all the nations. And I'm not promoting missionary stuff because that's a whole other conversation for a different podcast. But what I'm saying is that if we engage our confidence not based on having everything right or being the authority, but instead being confident in our love, being confident in our relationship, being confident in our ability to get things right after we mess up, that's where the freedom and the possibility come in. So yeah, your church might try something new and it flops. But what if your church was used to that and they said, yeah, let's try something else? How much more resilient could your church be if every line and every T didn't have to be crossed and dotted? What could we really be doing if your people in your congregation wanted to try something new, and they knew that if they tried it and failed, they'd have a loving congregation and said, okay, let's try again? What are the possibilities that we get into when we let go of this death grip on certainty, and instead, goodbye to the fear of failure, and instead love and embrace the way God does? who's like, yeah, y'all been getting it wrong a long time, but guess what? I love you.
I think Anne Lamott always talks about, you just imagine God smacking God's head every day, like, oh my, there they go again.
Right, just like we do with the kids, right? Or our kittens.
Yeah, right.
Because kittens will do things. And you're like, really? Okay, but I still love you.
Yeah.
And you're cute and you're fuzzy.
Yeah. And you're working on it. You're doing stuff. Thank you.
Darren, I was going to say, I think we could have a whole nother podcast on excellence in church, that philosophy, but we do not have time for that.
Oh, we should.
Let's talk real quick before we take a break. I want to get this plug in here for one of my sponsors that I know you've done some work for. This will air after the Festival of Homiletics, but folks will still be able to find these resources online. So talk about what you did for the future. The Festival of Homiletics will have happened. Their theme is the future of church. Talk about what you did with them on that theme.
This was our second time doing the Festival of Homiletics, and it was online last year and online again this year, and they asked us to create a full worship liturgy online, and so we did that, and like so many of our things that we have been doing, it kind of combines our music and video and spoken word, all those kinds of things, and invites participation, invites people like we've talked about to share their confessions, share their laments, share their gratitude in the moment. And so we created an experience like that. And I think that, in terms of their theme, the future of church, the experience that we created, I think was we had this image of, what does it mean to be the church today? And we talked a lot about that and sort of to be the church going forward. It actually, the answer we came to is probably won't surprise you, because we talked a lot about the church can't move forward until it reckons with the past and reckons with the things that are broken and the things that are broken in the world and in ourselves, and that the church, really the future of the church, depends on how willing we are to be honest and how willing we are to be vulnerable and how willing we are to, actually lament and confess. And so we kind of brought that to life in the context of a sort of hour-long worship experience.
Anyone else want to chime in with some thoughts there on that?
Well, just as a teaser, the metaphor throughout the whole experience is into the desert, is what the name of the experience is. And we actually created a desert in our backyard and filmed it. So look forward to that.
Wow, that's a teaser right there.
Right, that's a teaser. You're going to want to tune in for that.
So this should be, I'm assuming it'll be available because the festival has stuff on demand, I think, again, because this will air after the festival will have happened live, but festivalofhomiletics.com, I think it is, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So check it out, and I'm sure, I gotta imagine you'll have links for it on the many on your website, right?
Yeah.
Yep, we probably will.
You can go to themanyAreHere.com, and also if you're a church leader, we have a ton of resources on pluralguild.com, because this was never made to be a come see us thing. It was always about how are things that are useful for churches and communities, because maybe you don't describe yourself as a church, but how can we make things that are useful for people to use and do? And so we put it all out there.
Awesome.
Yeah, somebody who is not on this podcast, who's very important in the part of all of this stuff, whether it's the Plural Guild or the Many, is Gary Rand, who I happen to be married to, who is Hannah's father. And we're all a family. And we're sort of an extended family here with all of us and Darren and Leslie. But one of the things that Gary, along with, producing the music and writing some of the songs and all that kind of stuff, he and I started this group called the Plural Guild which was really meant to help resource churches who are looking into creative worship renewal. And so that's a good place to go to both find some resources and also to find out more about the Many. And then the Many has its own website too, themanyarehere.com.
Awesome. Speaking of the festival, let me break momentarily to drop in an ad for the festival next year. All right, we're back with the Many, and thanks so much for your time. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate hearing your perspectives and what y'all have been willing to share. These closing questions, I tell folks you can take them as seriously or not as you'd like to. And let's do it. One person, one response for fun here. Who wants to take, if you're Pope for a day, what that day's about, what it's looking like, that kind of thing?
We decided that was the hardest question.
I was gonna say I'll take a stab at it. Wait, I want to use nonviolent language. I'll offer something. If I were Pope for the day, or whatever you conceptualize as a influential church leader, then I'd love to see Love Your Neighbor as your Love Yourself Day. That is a day of self-care and a day of loving other people. And that's it.
That's good. I appreciate how you take that open-ended. I'm trying to, if you notice, our listeners can't see this, but I have quotation marks around the Pope, so it can be widely interpreted how you want to understand it. A theologian or historical Christian figure you would want to meet or bring back to life.
No, I still wanted to talk about the Pope.
Oh, okay.
Well, let's back up.
We can do that.
I would do it, because as a Pope you can do. How about we just make it so the Pope can do multiple things in one day?
Sure. Yeah, you're the Pope.
And so, in addition to what Darren said, the Pope is doing that day, we are going to share some of that vast funding that the papacy has, and we are going to make all that artwork available to the public.
Share the wealth.
Yes.
It's a Share the Wealth Pope Day.
Hey. And sell off some of those robes and those chains to pay for some of these fledgling Catholic churches and other communities. And that would be my Pope Day. In love.
Well, we seem to have energized this enthusiasm about what we want to do as Pope. Hannah or Lenora, you want to jump in here, or should we move on?
All I can think about now is that TV show Warrior Nun.
Yes, it's such a good show.
Because she is she's talking to the people that the Pope people and stuff. And so if I was Pope for a day, I would go figure out where these warrior nuns are and go hang out with them.
Okay.
This isn't related to the Velocipastor movie.
No, I don't think so. This is a very serious TV show, Darren.
Because there's a movie about a pastor who can morph into a velociraptor and has to fight ninjas. And the fact that this exists on Netflix, I don't know what to do with that reality.
Oh my goodness.
My kids would love that. That would be a great family movie. I mean, it could be not at all family movie, but I'm just thinking it combines. My kids love dinosaurs and I love church pastoring.
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Yeah. And I would just say that Warrior Nun is not a family show.
Not for children.
Okay, we're all in on this. So, Lenora, you have to give something now.
Oh, for the Pope. Oh, dear. I have so little, Pope orientation, religious figure orientation, but I guess I would say that I would make it a day in which the Pope tried to be brutally honest. Because I feel like the Pope is always, I think we put our religious leaders on a pedestal and they put themselves away from us and away from their own vulnerability and honesty. And so it would be the Pope going to be honest today.
All right. Theologian or historical Christian figure.
I'm ready for this one.
Go for it, Darren.
My patron saint, because I have Catholic background, so it's not appropriation. My patron saint isn't a canonized saint, but Bayard Rustin. He was a civil rights leader who really was the person who introduced Dr. Martin Luther King to nonviolent resistance and who planned the March on Washington. He was also a Quaker, so he was a Christian man, and he was also an openly gay man in a time where that was not a thing. And so he talked so much about how we use our bodies to gum up the gears of unjust systems. And he's somebody who speaks to my life on so many levels as a Christian, as a queer man, as somebody who has spent a lot of times behind the scenes supporting much bigger leaders who often gets written out of histories, and his impact is not seen as widely as it actually is. So somebody for me to like, it's like, yeah, he almost died in obscurity, but his impact really matters. And so that's who I'd like to talk to. I do not want to bring anybody back from the dead, though.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Awesome. What do we think history will remember from our current time and place?
A pandemic?
There you have it.
Yes. That right there, Hannah.
All right. Sorry, I'm marching along here, but I'm realizing I have another interview in 15 minutes and I need to stretch break. So let's forgive me for marching on here. What are your hopes for the future of Christianity?
I guess all I was going to say is my hope is that the church could get over itself.
Amen. Yes.
And I'm just going to leave it there.
And that was beautiful because that was straight to the point. And maybe we'll add, be where Jesus was.
Yeah. Tell our listeners where they can find out more about y'all.
Yeah, so I think like Darren said, we have our website, themanyAreHere.com, and we also have our resources website for church resources, pluralguild.com, and we're also on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter at themanyAreHere. And we also, like Leslie mentioned earlier, have a Patreon that you can join for only $3 a month and get all these cool stuff. And I think that's about it. Oh, and then we have Facebook.
We also have some nice merch.
Oh yeah, we do. Some nice t-shirts and mugs and such, which you can find on our website.
I feel like I need to know after what Darren said. Are you on TikTok?
We are not on TikTok yet.
We want to be, but we have not been there yet.
I mean, we do Instagram and we do Facebook stories and stuff, but TikTok creation, I'm learning is like a whole thing, but I'm experimenting with it, so.
Yeah. Darren and I have recently just fallen in love with TikTok, so I think we're going to need to be on there quite a little bit longer before the many takes on.
Also, I just wanted to point out, we've mentioned quite a few of our liturgies. They are also available on the website, the Plural Guild, for church leaders who are looking to for resources. There's a lot there that we're offering.
Yeah, we have lots of lyric videos, which during this time of online worship has been very important for people. And those are all available both on the Plural Guild and the manyAreHere.com. You can go and find all these things. And as Leslie was saying too, like a lot of the worship resources that we've created, like online times of lament or times of prayer or times of, various things, are visual and have music with them, and those are videos that you can get on our website as well, which a lot of churches have been using within their online worship experiences too. So,
well, awesome. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate y'all's time and sharing with me, and may God's peace be with you.
And
also
with you.
with
and
you.
also with you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Torn Curtain Arts in partnership with Resonate Media. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit futurechristian.com. If you've enjoyed the show and you think it would be valuable for others to hear, subscribe to the podcast, and leave a review. That really helps more people find us. Thanks again, and go in peace.